Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Oath of Nimrod, Giants, MK Ultra, and the Smithsonian Coverup by David S. Brody. Narrated by Ryan Burke. Preface. This novel is a bit of a break from the Templar-based themes I first explored in Cabal of the Westford Knight, and continued exploring in Thief on the Cross and Powdered Gold. In this book, I ventured down the rabbit hole to examine the hundreds of accounts of giant human skeletons unearthed in the 19th century by American farmers and treasure hunters. Were all these skeletons, numbering over 1,500 by one researcher's account, fakes and hoaxes? Or was there instead a race of 8 and 9 foot tall humans who roamed the North American wilderness? If so, were these giants somehow related to the giants recounted in the Old Testament? Of course, I can't very well write a book in the Templars of America series without delving into the mysteries of the Knights Templars and their possible journeys to America. In this story, I focus on the rituals and beliefs of the mysterious group whom many believe were spawned by the Templars, the Freemasons. Specifically, did the early Freemasons venerate a pagan Babylonian king by the name of Nimrod, and if so, why? This inquiry takes on even greater meaning when we learn that Nimrod, like Samson and so many other figures in the Bible, was himself described as a giant. I also weave the CIA mind control program known as MK Ultra into the story. This program, hatched during the early years of the Cold War, authorized experiments on U.S. citizens in an effort to unlock the secrets of the mind. These experiments included the use of hallucinogenic drugs, sleep deprivation, and psychological torture. The CIA justified these attacks on its own citizens as a necessity in its efforts to fight communism. Readers of the first 3 books in the series will recognize the protagonists, Cameron and Amanda, and also young Astarte. However, this novel is not a sequel to the prior 3, and readers who have not read the earlier novels should feel free to jump right in. As in the previous stories in the series, if an artifact or object of art is pictured in the book, it exists in the real world. See the author's note at the end of this book for a more detailed discussion covering the issue of artifact authenticity. To me, in the end, it is the artifacts that are the true stars of these novels. I remain fascinated by the hidden history of North America and the very real possibility that waves of European explorers visited our shores long before Columbus. It is my hope that readers share this fascination. David S. Brody, July 2014, Westford, Massachusetts. The eyes of extinct giants, whose bones fill the mounds of America, have gazed on Niagara Falls just as our eyes do now. Abraham Lincoln, 1848. Prologue. May 1952, Buenos Aires. The tall, stiff-backed American college professor blew on his hands as he waited in the passenger seat of a Jeep at the Argentine military base. He leaned away from the window, away from the rain blowing into the vehicle, and pulled his hat lower on his head. When Leonard Carmichael had left Boston 3 days earlier, the long winter was finally yielding to a late spring. Now he had returned to the cold. Apparently it didn't snow in Buenos Aires. But sitting here for almost an hour in the rain and fog had numbed his extremities and frayed his patience. For one of the few times in his life, he wished he smoked. "I think I see them coming, sir," the unnamed corporal seated in the driver's seat said. "Headlights on the left." Carmichael nodded. When he had accepted his appointment as secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, he had been expecting a semi-retirement spent rummaging around in the nation's attic. What he had not expected was to be thrown into the middle of the Cold War. But when the president asks a favor, one does not say no. "I have a very important mission," Truman had explained. "A secret mission, and, unfortunately, a distasteful mission. The mission requires someone with an expertise in behavioral psychology, and I need a man I can trust." Truman had smiled. "Know anyone like that?" What the president had not said, but which Carmichael understood, was that the mission also required a private citizen so that the government could deny involvement if things turned ugly. Since Carmichael would not be sworn into his Smithsonian post until January, He fit the bill. The meeting with Truman had been 3 months ago. Tonight's meeting would be a accumulation of Carmichael's efforts since. A black sedan pulled alongside the Jeep. The driver nodded, stepped from the car, and opened the rear door. As if on cue, the rain fell harder, propelled by a cold wind. Carmichael shivered. He slid out of the Jeep, his knees stiff, and ducked into the rear seat of the sedan. As he closed the door, cigarette smoke and the dank smell of wet wool engulfed him. He coughed into his hand and turned to eye the man seated next to him. The German looked older than his 39 years, soft-bodied, balding, a gray pallor to his skin. Hardly an archetype for the master race. Only his cold gray eyes marked the man as any kind of menace. Carmichael did not offer his hand. "Herr Weber, I presume?"
"I am Dr. Weber." The man's breath reeked of garlicky meat gone bad.
Carmichael exhaled and edged away. He wanted to take the man by the throat and tell him he had forfeited the right to use that title, but that would mean he actually had to touch him.
"You can guess why you are here?" "Guess? I do not need to guess. I can deduce."
Pedantic little prig. Had he been a student of his, Carmichael would have boxed his ears. "Go ahead, then. Deduce."
"If you were going to turn me over to the Israelis, or put me on trial for war crimes, there would be no need for this meeting. I would be on a plane already. So I must deduce you want to make me an offer."
He smiled, revealing a mouth of undersized yellow teeth that made Carmichael think of rats in an alley. "Incorrect. I may determine, based on this meeting, that you do not suit our needs, in which case there will be no offer, and within the hour you will indeed be on a plane to Tel Aviv." Weber's eyes widened. He knew that would be a death sentence, but he recovered quickly and lifted his chin.
"Well, then I will have to prove myself to you. What type of services are you in need of?"
That was the crux of it. Few people in the history of mankind had conducted the kind of human experiments Weber had conducted. Few people had been able to probe so deep into the secrets and mysteries of the human mind and psyche. And of those few, the rest were dead. "You spent time in Auschwitz?" He nodded.
"I was first attendant to the chief medical officer, Dr. Wirths."
"And you worked with Mengele?"
"I assisted Dr. Mengele in many of his medical experiments, yes."
Carmichael studied the man. Millions had died during the war. Tens of millions. Brave men and women, innocent children. Yet this rodent sitting next to him, who had done more evil in 1 week than an army of men could do in a lifetime, somehow lived, and was now to be rewarded. He took a deep breath, stared out the window. When he had accepted this mission, he knew it would be distasteful. But to be sitting so close to the man, to smell the evil on him. But there was no other way. The Soviets had already recruited Nazi death camp doctors, had already begun to experiment with mind control and brainwashing. Who knew what they might accomplish? Actually, Carmichael knew all too well. Studying the mind had been his life's work. A drug or chemical introduced into the water supply, or seated inside a rain cloud, or embedded into the jet stream. The Soviets could incapacitate America without ever firing a shot. And Carmichael had no doubt they would not hesitate to do so. The modern world had never before seen a man as evil as Hitler, but neither had it seen one as dangerous as Stalin. An old Bulgarian proverb popped into his head. "You are permitted in times of great danger to walk with the devil until you have crossed the bridge." He took a deep breath and stared into the eyes of the devil sitting next to him. There was no other way across the bridge. Chapter 1. Cameron Thorne exhaled. He never should have agreed to participate in this conference. A couple hundred conspiracy theorists fueling each other's paranoia at a hotel in central Massachusetts over a midwinter weekend. Even Amanda had taken a pass. "Astarte is in desperate need of new socks," she said, kissing him on the nose. "But you have fun. And don't let them convince you that aliens built the pyramids." The pyramid theory had been the least of it. It turns out the aliens had been far busier than that. From a seat on the side of the dais, Cam listened as the jowly, middle-aged Frenchman concluded his presentation. Finally, Jacques Autier was his name. "As I said, these reptilian aliens came to Earth thousands of years ago." In his French accent, he pronounced it as thousands, as if from an old Pink Panther movie. "The aliens came to mine our gold, but once here they crossbred with our females. These aliens were skilled lovers, apparently, and the Earth women welcomed them to their beds. Even today, many of us, especially those of us who descend from the French noble families, carry this alien blood through our veins." Autier's tongue flicked out to moisten his lips, as if hinting that this ancestry accounted for his prowess under the sheets. Autier continued, "It is this reptilian blood that flowed through the ancient kings of Israel, through the pharaohs of Egypt, through Jesus Christ, and through today's royal families of Europe." Autier scanned the hotel ballroom, shifting his shoulders as he pulled his charcoal-colored suit coat tight around his midsection. Cam's eyes followed Autier's. Not a yawn or a fidget in the entire crowd. That was the problem with being a student of alternative history. You ended up surrounded by conspiracy theorists willing to believe pretty much anything. Autier clasped his small-fingered hands together. "Through this interbreeding, these reptilian aliens have always ruled the Earth." He raised a hand, as if anticipating the obvious question. "And they shall rule forever, because if we rebel, they will kill us." He bowed his head. "Merci." Cam clapped politely, pulling himself to his feet as the crowd rose. How was he going to follow a presentation like this? Cam found a men's room. They were taking a 20-minute break, after which he was going to discuss European exploration of America before Columbus, and these explorers' connections to the Knights Templar and Freemasons. The topic fascinated Cam, and the Freemasons and Templars were usually good fodder for conspiracy buffs. But Cam's topic didn't compare to reptilian aliens mating with humans to create a subspecies of cold-blooded Earth rulers. Not even close. The good news, he supposed, was that this crowd would hardly be likely to dismiss him as a kook. What was that expression? Even a bad day skiing beats a good day at the office? Well, similarly, lecturing even at a bad conference beat practicing law for a living. He still maintained a limited real estate law practice to help pay the mortgage, but thankfully, the days of 74-hour work weeks in a downtown firm were behind him. Between his law practice, speaker fees, and his fiancée Amanda's income as a museum curator, they lived comfortably. As Cam threw his tie over his shoulder, a diminutive chestnut-skinned man sauntered over and leaned into the urinal next to his. He turned and smiled, his brown eyes bright and playful beneath a pair of dark, bushy eyebrows, which contrasted with a full head of cottony white hair. If Barack Obama had a short, kindly grandfather, he would look like this, Cam decided. "Pardon me if I do not shake your hand," he said, enunciating every word. "My name is Randall Sid. I have attended this conference for the sole purpose of hearing your lecture." Cam looked down at the man. Cam was only of average height, but he towered over Randall by almost a foot. Even taking into account that most elderly people lose a couple of inches, Randall could never have been much more than 5 feet tall. "Mine?" Cam asked. "Indeed. And to meet you. I attended your lecture once before. You spoke at a Masonic lodge in Rhode Island a number of months back." Cam walked to the sink and washed his hands. "I guess I should be flattered," he smiled. "I can't even get my mother to hear my lectures more than once." Randall grinned. He wore a gold and black argyle sweater vest over a button-down cream dress shirt and a pair of khakis. Cam wondered if he dressed like a prep school student because he couldn't find clothes in his size. Or maybe he just liked the sweater. "An attractive young lady accompanied you in Rhode Island. British. Amanda, perhaps, if I remember correctly." Randall spoke in the Boston Brahmin accent made famous by President Kennedy and later Charles Emerson Winchester III in the MASH television show. He omitted the letter R from the end of words, as did other Boston speakers. but otherwise he cherished every letter of every word like a favorite pair of khakis. He seemed to enjoy the act of speaking, as unwilling to rush through a sentence as through a snifter of fine brandy. Yes, Amanda Spencer-Gunn, my fiancée. He winked. Truth be told, I came here today to see her more than I did to hear you. Cam chuckled. Despite Randall's stilted way of speaking, the man exuded an air of jovial irreverence. I get that a lot, Cam said. Amanda was strikingly beautiful, like something out of a grim fairy tale. Cream-colored skin, lime-green eyes, blonde flowing hair, and a lithe gymnast's body. And highly intelligent, as much of an expert on the Templars and their exploration of North America as was Cam. In short, Cam liked to joke way too good for him. But she didn't enjoy public speaking, so she was happy to stay home with Astarte, the 9-year-old girl they were in the process of adopting. Cam smiled wryly. Apparently Amanda had a desperate need to go shopping for socks. Randall smiled again and motioned toward the ballroom. I believe the term for this type of event is large tent. There is sufficient room within for any and all conspiracy theories. Much like a Jesse Jackson campaign rally. I do not blame your Amanda for passing on it, he chuckled. No, not at all. Cam took his time drying his hands. He figured Randall was around 80, but sharp and vibrant, and he obviously hadn't followed Cam into the bathroom to inquire about Cam's love life. Randall continued, I was observing you during this last lecture. Unless I am an even worse poker player than my friends tell me I am, my guess is that you are not a subscriber to the reptilian alien theory. Cam shook his head. I'm pretty open-minded, Randall interrupted, which is a fine thing to be. I have never observed anyone's brain falling out because of it, he smiled. Cam laughed. As I was saying, I could even be convinced aliens landed here. But reptilian aliens breeding with humans and creating a ruling class? Sorry. Randall nodded. Quite. He flushed the urinal and turned to face Cam, one bushy eyebrow lifted toward the ceiling. As everyone knows, it was a race of alien giants, not reptiles, who bred with our women. I'm sorry, giants? Are you not a Bible scholar, Mr. Thorne? Not really, no. What's the old expression? Fable is more historical than fact, because fact tells us about one man, whereas fable tells us about 1,000,000 men. That's what the Bible is, you see, a fable. But it tells the history of mankind. But what does this have to do with giants? Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. He cleared his throat and spoke in a deep, sonorous manner, apparently in an attempt to be more godlike, the effect somewhat mitigated by the fact he was standing with his zipper down in front of a urinal. There were giants on the earth in those days. The sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Cam replayed the words in his mind. Wait, does that say the sons of God mated with human females to produce giants? That is precisely what it says. You have heard of them, fallen angels, no doubt? That is what the term is referring to. Angels, or sons of God, who came from the sky to breed with human women. But we're talking about angels. Earlier you said it was aliens. Randall zipped his fly, but seemed in no rush to end the conversation. Indeed. The Bible calls them angels because they came from the sky. I believe it is just as likely they were aliens. He lifted his chin. And since the offspring of these aliens were giants, it seems to me that the aliens must have been oversized as well. Cam nodded. He supposed giant aliens were as believable as angels. Randall continued. So, as I said, rather than alien reptiles breeding with our womenfolk, as Monsieur Ortier would have us believe, I think it is more likely that the blood of alien giants courses through our veins. In fact, that is precisely what ancient Sumerian tablets describe. He smiled and raised himself up on his toes, his white hair bouncing with him. Unfortunately, the giant gene appears to be a recessive one. Cam laughed. He liked people who could make fun of themselves. Randall finally moved away from the urinal and washed his hands. As strange as this tale was, I fear you are going to need to totally suspend your disbelief for what I would like to tell you next. If you will indulge me, that is. Cam checked his watch. Why not? He had been listening to kooks and conspiracy theorists all weekend, and Randall at least seemed likable. I have 10 minutes before my lecture. They found a pair of easy chairs in the hotel lobby. I am going to give you the abbreviated version, Randall said, because the full version would take hours. His eyes turned hard. Are you familiar with Project MK Ultra? Cam shrugged. No. Very well. You allotted me 10 minutes, and I intend to get my money's worth. For a man his size, Randall spoke with a remarkably deep voice. MK Ultra began after World War II. It was a secret government program that drugged and brainwashed American citizens. Students, refugees, convicts, residents of mental hospitals, even soldiers. The program used Americans as experimental guinea pigs, but the ultimate goal was to establish methodologies to brainwash and control the minds of foreign leaders. Many people know about the program. There were a number of congressional hearings in the 1980s where the details were revealed. Randall paused. But what the general public does not know is that Project MK continues even today. We are more subtle in our methodologies. We have come to learn that influencing behavior is a more realistic goal than turning our enemies into sock puppets, but the result is the same. It continues? That is what I just said. And you know this how? Randall sat forward. I know this because I have spent my entire adult life working for the CIA, most of the time on MK Ultra. He stared at Cam before pulling a sheaf of papers from the briefcase at his feet. You may read all about the program here. He extended the papers to Cam. This is a full transcript of the congressional hearings from the 1980s. The hearings were secret, and most of the testimony was sealed. But here is the testimony in its entirety. Just please do not let anyone catch you with it. It will give you an idea of what kind of misguided programs our government pursued, and still pursues. Cam stood and checked his watch as he accepted the papers. He needed to get into the hall to give his lecture. Why are you giving this stuff to me? Randall waited until Cam raised his eyes. Because the program is targeting you, Mr. Thorne. Me? Why? He was tempted to grab the man's shoulder and shake the answer from him. What in the world could they want from him? Randall shrugged and smiled. If I knew that, I would not have wasted my time today listening to some idiot prattle on about alien reptiles. All I know is that the agency intends to brainwash you. He stood, with a surprising bounce in his stride, ambled toward the lobby door. After 3 steps he stopped and turned. In fact, I believe they have already begun. Chapter 2. A week had passed since the conference and Cam's conversation with Randall Sid. Cam barely remembered giving his lecture that night. It must have gone okay, because a number of people came up afterward to chat and ask questions. But his mind was then, and had continued to be since, focused on Randall Sid's warning. Was it possible the CIA had already begun to brainwash him? He didn't know how to answer that question. It seemed to him that, by definition, people who were brainwashed weren't aware of it. Otherwise, they would take steps to prevent it. Had they been putting something in his water? Whispering in his ear when he was asleep? Drugging his food? Hypnotizing him? During his lecture, he had glanced out to see if Randall had doubled back to listen. But nothing. Randall claimed to be CIA, or at least ex-CIA, so Cam supposed that one of the possibilities was that the little man still worked for the government, in which case he may have been lying to Cam about the brainwash stuff. But to what end? After the lecture, Cam was supposed to have stuck around for a dinner-time panel discussion on a topic related to the reptilian alien presentation. Apparently every U.S. president, including Barack Obama, could trace his lineage directly back to the British royal family. This tied in tangentially to the fact that a high percentage of U.S. presidents and signatories of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons. Most of the conference attendees viewed these facts as evidence that a secret cabal of power brokers controlled and handpicked the leaders of Europe and North America. Normally, Cam would have enjoyed the debate, but he had had enough. He had spent the day listening to people play strange games of connect the dots with history, and his head hurt, so he had slipped out a side door. If anyone asked, he would have said he had been brainwashed into leaving early. He and Amanda had stayed up late the night he returned from the conference, batting back and forth the possibility of Cam being brainwashed or otherwise targeted for mind control. In the end, they decided to take some precautions. They began to drink only bottled water. Cam made an appointment with a new doctor and underwent a full physical and body scan. And they hired a security expert to sweep their home, cars, and cell phones for listening and tracking devices. These precautions uncovered nothing. As a last resort, Cam announced, I'm not going to watch any more Rocky and Bullwinkle with Astarte. I'm convinced those guys are putting strange thoughts into my head. Miss your cartoons? Not bloody likely. Amanda had laughed, and she was probably right. The addition of Astarte to their home had given Cam the chance to rediscover many of the cartoon characters of his youth. He had spent 6 months in bed with a fractured back as a 5th grader, and for long stretches his only companions were the animated characters of the old UHF television channels. Lately, he and Astarte had taken to prancing around the living room reciting a poem from Wordsworth, taught to them by Bullwinkle the Moose. A host of golden daffodils. Cam did forego enough cartoon time to read through the materials Randall had given him, alternately fascinated and outraged at both the arrogance and callousness of Project MKUltra. Even the name sounded like something out of a James Bond movie. The letters MK denoted the CIA division in charge of developing secret weapons and covert tools. Some testimony indicated it derived from the German spelling of mind control, while the word Ultra signified the most secret of all CIA classifications. Under the operation, the CIA conducted mind-altering experiments on American and Canadian citizens, many of whom suffered long-term physical and psychological damage. Shockingly, some of the test subjects even committed suicide. The list of those experimented upon by the CIA, through the use of hallucinogenic drugs such as heroin and LSD, electric shock treatment, neural stimulation, sexual abuse, and/or physical torture, read like headlines from a supermarket tabloid. The Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, was given high doses of hallucinogenic drugs while a student at Harvard. Sirhan was subject to mind control and may have been brainwashed into shooting Robert Kennedy. Boston gangster James Whitey Bulger was tortured, drugged, and perhaps subjected to electric shock during his incarceration at Alcatraz. And a number of women claimed to have been brainwashed and used as sex slaves for Bob Hope and other Hollywood celebrities. Perhaps most disturbing of all was the revelation that the CIA employed associates of the barbaric Dr. Josef Mengele, the Nazi angel of death from Auschwitz, as consultants in overseeing the MKUltra program and its experiments, which would explain the Germanic MK abbreviation for mind control. Officially, the program, which operated for decades after World War II, was finally shut down in the 1980s after a series of congressional hearings detailing the abuses shocked the nation. But according to Randall Sid, it continued even today. Late one night after Astarte had gone to bed, Cam summarized the information for Amanda. "Are you sure this stuff is accurate?" she asked, curling up next to him on the living room couch, her thick blonde locks tumbling onto his shoulder. "There's a lot of so-called facts on the internet that are batty." "This isn't coming from the internet. What I've been reading is sealed testimony from congressional hearings in the 1980s. The info comes from the CIA itself. It's incredible." In the 60s, the CIA was worried about all the protests on college campuses. He smiled. "You know, anti-war, civil rights, all sorts of deviant ideas. So what they did was develop a new strain of pneumonia virus and purposely spread it on college campuses where demonstrations were planned, just to keep the crowds down." "Bloody lovely.
Your tax dollars at work. It's pretty sick.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?